Hey everyone, Georgie here with Ukraine Matters. I am back in my studio and I'm going to talk about a lot of things. NATO summit is still rounding up. There are a couple of very important discussions is still happening today. So I'm going to wait until tomorrow to make a video on what's about the NATO summit. And I'm going to talk more about the political situation in videos this week. I want to pump a lot of them up to kind of reimburse you for the fact that was on a vacation. But let's get on the front lines and let's talk about what is happening. We have a lot of news, some good, some maybe just less so, but we're going to talk about everything, that I want to be very, very honest with you. So as you can see, Deep State Map has already acknowledged a certain thing. This bridgehead that Ukraine has been developing on the left side of the river, left bank of the Dnieper River, has been established. It's now controlled by Ukrainians, and we also know that Russians pretty much, they're still trying to kind of get rid of it, but it's more of a limp dick reaction to it. They're just trying to kind of slap Ukrainians out of it compared to what they were trying to do before. So right now we can say that this bridgehead is established on this side. What Russians instead did is they significantly damaged the bridge right here, so not to let Ukrainians to get from this island to essentially the village of Oleshki. However, still getting a foothold in this area for Ukrainians. Obviously, it's not as large as I'm showing right now, but generally speaking, having a bridgehead on the left side is a very threatening move. For why it's threatening, I recommend you watching my update from a couple of, oh man, that's like a week ago, but I discussed it in details. Now let's talk about maybe some of the less favorable. Now, an important thing, I want to repeat this again. Right now, Ukraine is not in a phase of gaining territory, right? We need to remember that right now, Ukraine is trying to stretch Russian forces. It's trying to push Russians to use their resources, to use their reserves, and they're trying to continue striking on the Russian assets to create an opportunities for their strike later on. Now, I've been potentially speculating that Ukraine would want to strike before the summit of NATO and regain certain territory to give a nice optics for themselves. But I guess the complicated situation, I think it's worth acknowledging that obviously this is not going by the optimistic scenario, but we already discussed that. But generally speaking, in a military sense, everything is still quite fine. There is nothing that suggests that what Ukraine is doing is not producing results. Right now, we're seeing Russia doing exactly and playing exactly into Ukraine's fiddle. The situation on the last week can be described roughly by the Russians are using their resources and counterattacking like crazy. That we can say. So around Zherubyanki, I told you that Ukraine has, after they liberated Pyatikhatki, they moved towards the direction of Zherubyanki, and Pitikhatki is in a valley, whereas Zherubyanki is like on a hill. So Russians are on the hill, Ukrainians are in the valley. Therefore, Ukrainians, when they captured Pitikhatki, they tried to eventually also get on top of the hill that is overlooking Piatikhatki in the area of Zherubyanki. However, they couldn't do it right away. They were able to capture like only small piece of that hill, an important one, but still. However, Russians over the last week with the counterattacks were able to push Ukrainians back from their positions. Right now in these areas, mostly artillery duels are happening. It doesn't mean that Ukrainians are not going anywhere. They are. There are reports that Ukrainians are kind of advancing along these forest paths towards the Dolinka and so on. But because there is no kind of places to notably talk about where Russians would panic and report in their news saying, oh no, we lost again this thing. So there is not really much to cover here. Around Robotyne. So around Robotyne, there are two news. First one, there's a little bit of turmoil in the Ukrainian 47th Brigade. Right now, there's certain unease that is happening within the brigade because of how brigade is utilizing their equipment, how brigade is utilizing their troops, because when we are talking about Ukrainian losses during the offensive, and we're talking about losses of Bradleys and Leopards and so on, a lot of it, if not bulk of it, is coming actually from the area of Robotyne, around Zherubyanki. And it seems that there are certain internal problems with it, but On details on it, I cannot tell you enough. What I can tell you, though, is that Ukrainians do have a success here in part of land. Robotine, this map shows that Ukrainians are kind of like on the flanks here, but it is confirmed with video evidence and so on that Ukrainians are operating both on the sides of Robotine. I think the goal is to kind of push back towards the around Robotine to take it in some kind of encirclement and squeeze Russians out, maybe. But most of the things that we're seeing is essentially a both-way fighting. Ukrainians are slowly advancing towards the sides of Robotine with their armored columns, and some of them are getting caught in the minefields, destroyed, and so on. Then Russians try to do the same in the opposite way, like counterattack to push Ukrainians back, and they also get destroyed basically on the same ways. So I've already seen pictures where there's essentially some of the Western equipment side by some of the Russian equipment. So it's a little bit of a mess. So you can say so these overhanging sides of Robotine are right now very much contested, and it's a battlefield over there. Around Makharivka and Staromayorsk here, Priyutne is another one of those cases of Russians counterattacking. Ukrainians assaulted Priyutne and were able to take significant part of the settlement. However, later on down the week, there was a counterattack by Russians, and they were able to push Ukrainians out of Priyutne. Therefore, the battles are ongoing. Additionally, beyond of the latest episodes around the area of Makharivka, which is on top of the hill of Staromayorsk, this place right here, there has been videos of significant advances of Ukrainians. Now, how deep have they advanced? How much land did they have liberated? As you can see, not a lot of villages in the area. So most of these things, it's a hilltop with a lot of free area. So there is not a lot of things to report, like we've taken this hill, we're taking this hill, and so on, and not everything is coming out right away. What we know is that Ukrainians are applying significant force in this area, and they're using significant number of armored columns, armored vehicles, to try to take over these hills that are overlooking the valley that is located around Staromayorsk over here. Obviously, this comes with Russians trying to counterattack and stop Ukrainians and so on. That's pretty much the south side. So all in all, the fighting continues. Ukraine still have not engaged any additional brigades, any additional things, any additional supplies, and so on. Everything we've seen so far was the same 4 brigades that Ukraine have been engaging at the same time. The only thing, I believe, additional Western equipment that were noted were around the area of Kreminna. This is where there were appearing pictures of Swedish CV-90s appearing. So potentially they've been using for the defensive operations, because around this area, this is where Russia, I've talked about this a couple of episodes ago, where Russia wants to kind of disbalance Ukraine, saying, okay, Ukraine, your plan is essentially arrow this way. So in that sense, if you're putting effort there, we're going to put effort here. Therefore, we're going to disbalance your front line and try to make sure that you will have to use your resources where you don't want them to be used. This is what Ukraine is facing right now. We have reports in the last couple of days that there has been significant Russian forces used to move towards Torske, to move towards Serebyanka, and so on, to kind of try to push Ukrainians out of these areas. Now, some Russians already made like saying, oh wow, like this is already successful, like already Torske has been taken, Russians are advancing towards Yampil, trying to take Zarishne, and maybe Liman is already in the sights. Not even close. Like, that is a complete propaganda nonsense, so you should drop it right away. Where Ukraine did have really good success around the last week was the area around Klishivka. Now, I already talked about the fact that the big confusion about was whether Ukrainians have or have not liberated Klishivka was because Klishivka, the village, is located here. However, right on top of village of Klishivka, there is a hill that is overlooking that village, and that hill is a dominant high in pretty much the whole southern Bakhmut area, so around this area here. And that hill is also sometimes referred to as a Klishivka, but only like as a Klishivka defense position, mostly because for the militaries, Klishivka village, because its location and just like it's not really that relevant. So very often you would hear them refer to Klishivka as to refer to this position that is overlooking the heights on the south of Bakhmut, and the position that is also a fortified position. So Ukrainians last week have liberated it fully. They are now in control. Russians are trying to counterattack, but they are not having a good success. Moreover, there are reports that around Berkhivka Yagidne, Ukrainians are now also in control of the heights in this area and Klishivka. And this is where essentially, because of how Bakhmut is located, if one controls this heights and then also this heights, this gives you a fire control of everything that goes in and around Bakhmut. If I know for 100% that Klishivka heights are controlled by Ukrainians, I am not 100% firmly confident that heights around Berkhivka Yagina are controlled by Ukrainians. I know there has been success, but I'm not sure if the control is as tight as it is in the south. But if it is, that means that Bakhmut right now is in a fire pocket, so everything that goes into the city or out of the city can be shot by Ukrainians. Now, there are different descriptions that some people describe it as, like some professionals, our military says that this is potential and operative encirclement and so on. I still think that this is not really the right way to say. What we should say as a normal people, that doesn't change anything for us. We're still going to see the same map. What changes is the situation for Russians. Because right now, for Russians, this is a kill zone. This is where, when they go in, there's a very high likelihood you're going to get spotted by some Ukrainian spotters. You're going to get some artillery targeted by your positions, and you're going to get destroyed. And so for Ukrainians, it's just a nice field to exterminate a lot of Russians. The most important developments around the north of Bakhmut, besides the discussion about the dominant heights of Berkhivka and so on, is the situation that happened kind of like unknowingly. Like, I knew that something was up in the north, but didn't really sure where exactly. And that happened around Rozdolivka. Here, Ukrainians were able to penetrate extremely deep into the Russian rear. And right now, Russians are scrambling to essentially prevent further advances from Ukrainians. Because if they will be able to do, maybe, cut in here to cut off the Solidar supply lines to Krasna Hora, or maybe even cut into Solidar, into this salient, it's a dangerous proposition for Russians. Because if you can see, this creates, if Ukrainians are essentially able to push further something like this, and then they will take the heights around Berkhivka Yagidne, and then that will basically just allow Ukrainians to exit to Krasna Hora, then a lot of these Russians over here to the left will have a very bad day. I actually recorded a lot more talking whether or not the offensive for Ukrainians is going as planned, can it be improved, what they have done right, what they have done wrong, but it made video just a lot more bulkier than I was hoping for. So instead, I'm gonna make a video every day for the rest of the week, just to compensate for the fact that I was on vacation. So make sure to like, subscribe this channel, follow it through, and also if you still want the patches for the truck campaign that we did to deliver vehicles to the armed forces of Ukraine, I'm gonna cover the rest, what was left for those vehicles today, to make sure we close that campaign. So if you really want patches, this is your last call to donate for those patches. Otherwise, I love you all. Slava Ukraini. See you guys tomorrow. Yeah, it's good to be back.